Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to The Break. This is episode 2, where we don't have a very specific topic or any races that we're going to focus on, but we are going to just look a little bit at the changing political image in America for the 2022 midterms. But to start off, let's look at Joe Biden's approval rating. His approval rating right now is at an all-time low. It's only at 38.4%. The interesting thing, though, is we are starting to see the price of lumber decrease. Actually, since March, it's down 50%, and we're also starting to see gas prices come down a little bit. So we might see this approval get back up, maybe not to where it was before. At the beginning of his term, it was around 53%. I don't think it'll get back that high, but it might start to increase a little bit, but it might not even hit 50%. Heading over to the direction of country polls over on RCP, it's pretty much the same story as it was last week. It's a massive margin between the people who think we are on the right track and on the wrong track. People who think we are on the wrong track now up to 75.4%, while people who think we are in the right direction is only at 17.9%. Heading back to 538 for the generic ballot, we can see Republicans at plus 1.8 right now. So last week we were talking about how when the Republicans took the lead in November of last year, it was steadily climbing to a little over 2 points and it dropped down to 2. It has since dropped to plus 1.6, and then it went back up to plus 1.8. That's where it is today. We can see the reason that it went up again and it didn't continue to go down is likely this poll from July 5th to 7th. It is a B-rated pollster. However, this is not a very credible pollster. They tend to skew extremely conservative in most of their polls. So a new metric that I want to look at, we did not look at last week, but I've used it in previous election cycles, is the betting odds for these different races here. So we're looking right now at the betting odds for control of the Senate. So Republican price now is at 63%. You can say that's a 63% chance that they're favored to win in the betting odds. At 63% of people who are betting money on it think Republicans are going to win, and 38% of Democrats. And this has gotten a little interesting because it's gotten closer around June 30th. And then it got a little bit bigger, but back just a couple weeks ago, really before the Dobbs decision, it wasn't really even close. It was at about 80 and 20. But now it's gotten down to 63 and 38. Heading to the House betting odds, it's a much different story. Republicans now at 86 cents, 86% chance of winning, or 86% favored, however you want to look at it. Democrats are at 15 cents. Or 15% chance of winning. Again, this is not a percentage-based model, so it doesn't mean that 86% chance of going Republican, a 15% chance of going Democrat. That's not the case, but it is helpful to a certain extent because it tells us what a majority of people who are willing to invest money think. And these are not just kind of any people. These are people who are really looking at the polls, looking at every analytic tool out there. So the House, 86 cents for Republicans, 15 cents for Democrats, and this really hasn't changed too much. It got a little bit closer a little before the House did, but not by much. So Republicans, they're still favored to win the House by a lot, by 87. Democrats only having a 13% chance right now. And that's very close to the prices on this. 86 and 87, and then 15 and 13. So very close. That's not usually something that happens too much. Usually it's similar to the odds of winning, but not by this much. It's usually not this close. And then heading over to the Senate model, it is very different. Remember, it is 63 cents for a Republican share right now, but they only have a 54% chance of winning according to the 538 models here. So very close race there. 54% chance Republicans win the Senate, 46% chance Democrats win. Essentially a flip of the coin, a toss-up. Alright, so now looking at the Senate polls, we're going to start off with Pennsylvania. Nothing new from Pennsylvania since last week. Still an average 6.3% lead for John Fetterman, just using these past 3 polls here. Heading over to Georgia, we now see Raphael Warnock up a whole percentage point in the average for polling. He was only up about, I think, 0.2 or 0.3 when we last looked at this race. So we can see a couple new polls have come out since then, mostly these 2 polls right here from B and a B- rated pollster. So that's jumped him up to a +1 lead over Herschel Walker right now, and that's probably something that we would expect to be higher if it wasn't such a poor year for Democrats. He's not exactly unpopular in Georgia. There's no real reason that an incumbent should be doing this poorly, but the fact that Georgia is just so close, essentially every race, every statewide race there is a toss-up, and the fact that Democrats are just not having a good past 2 years, that probably is the reason why he's only +1, especially because Herschel Walker is not a very strong candidate. Heading to North Carolina, there's nothing new here. I don't even believe, no new polls have come out. So in North Carolina, Ted Budd leads +1.8. In Nevada, also no new polls since way back in June 30th, actually was the last new poll from there. So +0.9 lead for Catherine Cortez Masto. It's the same as last week. No new information there. In Ohio, however, we do have a pretty big swing. So the last time we looked at this, so it was on July 3rd, I guess it must have been July 2nd was the last time it was updated. J.D. Vance was up 2.5 points. So that's the Republican, very favored in Ohio. It's been becoming more and more Republican these past years. So the Republican up 2.5 points the last time we looked at it, around July 2nd. But since then, Tim Ryan has actually taken the lead. He's now up 1.8 points. And that's mostly due to these C-rated pollsters that have come out, having him up 9, up 12, and up 9 again. So that's probably the reason for this. So again, these are C-rated pollsters. They're not highly rated, but there were 3, and one of them had over 1,000 people. The other one had almost 1,000 registered voters. So it is possible that these numbers are somewhat accurate to a degree. I don't think Tim Ryan is up 12%, but it is possible that he's up 1.8% in Ohio. It is definitely a swing, though, and it's not something I expected. And then finally, in Florida, still nothing new here. The last average lead for Marco Rubio was 6 points. And since there's no new polls, there haven't been any new polls since the end of May, actually. That's still going to be the story. Marco Rubio up 6 points. Definitely makes sense in Florida, given how Florida is becoming more and more conservative. To see the incumbent Marco Rubio up 6 points just makes sense. So since there's no new information, we're just going to leave it at that. Heading over to Colorado governor polls, still nothing new here. The last time we looked at some polls, it was averaged, and I had a +17.5 lead for Democratic incumbent Jared Polis. We're still sticking with that because no new polls. Heading over to Florida, still nothing new here for governor polls. The last time we looked, I averaged these 2 most recent polls and had the Democrat up a 0.5 percentage point. Again, these were just 2 polls that I averaged recently from May. They were the 2 most recent, and they're not even graded pollsters. They don't have a letter grade, but those are the most recent polls we have. It's the most recent information, so we use that, and that's still the most recent information, so nothing new there. So in Georgia, we do have some new information here. Brian Kemp has actually expanded his lead. That's from this the Data for Progress rated pollster, having him up 9 points. So that's the reason he jumped. He jumped 0.8% in the average. So now he's up almost 6 points in the average over Stacey Abrams. Not too much of a surprise. I would expect it to be a little bit lower, but since Georgia is always super close, and since Brian Kemp is the incumbent here, and since it's not a good year for Democrats. This does make sense to a degree to have him up by almost 6 points at this point in the race. In Kansas, we know this is probably going to be a close race because there's a Democratic incumbent, but still nothing new there. We really have no clue what's going on in terms of polls. In Nevada, also nothing new. Steve Sisolak still plus 2.1 points. There have been no new polls since early June, so it's still the same number, still Steve Sisolak leading. That's Nevada. In New Mexico, another race we're watching, it probably shouldn't be too close, but no new polls once again. And there will be more and more polls once we get closer to election day, so we probably won't have shows like this where we're going through a bunch of them and there's just no new results to talk about, or there's no new polling information, or no new, whatever kind of information to talk about. So usually there will be more and more polls when we get closer to election day, but until then, there's probably going to be quite a bit of this no new poll, no new numbers type of stuff. Again, New Mexico, still no new information. Pennsylvania as well, no new information there. So we're still going to be looking at these 3 polls right here. So it's Shapiro plus 3, Shapiro plus 3, and Shapiro plus 4. Averaging those polls together, we have Josh Shapiro at 47% and Doug Mastriano at 43.6%. So a 3.4% lead for Josh Shapiro in the Pennsylvania governor's race. Again, no change since last week. There's been no new polling. And then in Texas, I don't think there's any new information here. Still Greg Abbott up almost 10 points in the governor's race. And if you want to hear more of the analysis of this race or any of the other races, you can go back to last week, first episode, where I talked about these races more in depth. I kind of gave a little more background information on some of the candidates. But since we don't have any new information, there's not much to talk about in these races. So this episode's probably going to be shorter and just be less detailed. But again, if you want more detail on these races or these candidates, you can go back to last week where I talked about them all a little more in depth. So that will do it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. This was a little shorter episode, less in depth. We didn't really talk about any specific races or polls, but hopefully next week we'll have some more information to talk about. And in terms of next week, make sure you get subscribed and hit the bell so you don't miss next week's episode. Also leave a like. But that's it. Thanks everybody.